I can still remember when I was a young guy in my early 20s back in 2004, learning pickup, when I first got involved in the pickup scene, and I hadn't yet decided my feelings on the matter, but I remember a story that was told to us that neatly explained why women are the way they are. And it's an anthropological story that describes our genetic history. The story goes like this. Way back when, we lived on the plains, we lived in small tribes, and in these small tribes there were limited numbers of mating opportunities. Now, as a woman, one thing we know about women is when they're pregnant, especially in the later stages, they are largely incapacitated. There's lots of things that are hard for them to do. They're quite vulnerable at that space. Both mom and baby are quite vulnerable. But even after she gives birth, baby is very vulnerable, needs a lot of care, a lot of resources to help raise it and keep it alive in those early stages. Human babies are particularly vulnerable in the animal kingdom. And because of this, women learned, genetically, their genes learned that if you just engaged in promiscuous sex with men, you could get pregnant and those men could run away with another woman and you would be left alone, all alone to try to fend for yourself and this baby. And that could make it much harder to survive when you're in the later stage of pregnancy. You might easily be killed. You're exposed to the elements. You're not able to forage as well. And then when you have that child, there's no one to take care of you both. And that's very dangerous. And so a lot of those mothers would have died. Therefore, there would have been a genetic pressure for women to be very wary of any kind of casual encounter with men. And we bought this story on the whole. Men in general bought the story because it sounded scientific. It sounded good. It sounded like, boom, science, that makes sense. That explains my viewpoint of the world precisely. So it must be true. But even back in 2004, all you really needed to do was have a conversation with an anthropologist who would have kindly pointed out that, well, yes, we lived in tribes. The tribes weren't that small. They were sort of more 40, 50, 60 people large. But also, everyone in that tribe was like a distant family. I mean, the tribe was a very strong unit, we believe, right? That you had brothers and sisters and cousins twice removed. You were surrounded by them. If you were a woman and you got pregnant, whether or not you had a man around, that you were taken care of by the tribe. Your child was taken care of by the tribe, not just you as the mother or you as the mother and father alone. The health and successful growing up of children is critical to the survival of any tribe, because tribe members die, tribe members, things happen to them in accidents, whatnot. It's really important to keep that tribe growing. One of the main ways to do that is by having children. So children have always been important in all tribes, and tribes would have always, or almost always, taken care of kids. So mums and bubs were not left alone in the elements if a man ran away. That was never the case in any of the historical record that we can see. And yet, in spite of what the real experts have to say on the matter, that story persists to this day. That particular story in the pickup artists, the dating coaching community, that story persists, and it's patently wrong. So today, I really want to take some time and I want to talk about good stories, bad science, and why those two together can lead to some seriously dangerous outcomes for you. Sure, it's all fun and games to look at what doctors used to think just a few hundred years ago. Is your wife angry that you went and cheated on her? She might have a wandering uterus. Do you have a slave that's trying to escape? He might well have brain damage. And luckily for us, in the last 100 years, we've had the scientific method applied rigorously to medicine, to the point where we now have a lot of trust in what doctors have to say. And yes, doctors aren't always right, but it's taken us a long way. And just as doctors were starting to get the scientific method right, then psychologists came along. Oh, well, penis envy is a thing that women often have. Is your woman moody frequently? This vibrator might help the problem. Now, as it turns out, I secretly think the vibrator could be a solution to a few problems out there, but let's not go too far down that rabbit hole just now. And yes, while it's kind of humorous now, the truth is back then, that was considered the gospel truth. And it was considered the gospel truth because we weren't really applying the scientific method. What we were doing was, here is what I see happening anecdotally. This isn't being rigorously tested, just anecdotally. This is what I think I'm seeing. And here's a really good story that makes sense to me right now in the zeitgeist of the culture that I live in right now and the people that I'm surrounded by. This kind of matches what we think is likely to be true. So it probably is true. So that's what I'm going to do. This is the way that science was done. But since then, of course, we've developed the scientific method. And the scientific method requires that I come up with an idea. That idea must be falsifiable. And then I run a series of experiments that maybe help to prove my idea, and then I publish my results, and then when I publish my results, it then undergoes the peer review process where a whole bunch of other people look at my research and poke holes in it, usually lots and lots of holes. Because you see, the issue is that we are wired as humans. We are wired to believe stories. We like stories. And when stories make sense, they kind of click, everything falls into place, we assume they're true. And the experts, the scientists, the researchers fall into this trap all the damn time. Judges fall into this trap too. There are many instances of judges who've sent people to prison, and those people have later been exonerated undefiably, right? Like really obvious evidence has come to light. And those judges are still convinced 100% that they were correct. They fabricate stories in their heads to make sure that person in their minds is still guilty. And what's happened is they've gotten out of jail for free, even though the truth was undeniable. And so if it happens to the experts, we shouldn't be surprised that effect happens to us, because we really aren't good at understanding statistics and probability. We're not wired for this kind of stuff. We can study it and research it and understand it conceptually, but it never really goes down into our gut like a good story can. And so while doctors and psychologists are largely doing a far better job than they did 200 years ago, what is an area that I still see way, way, way more good story, poor science applied? Dating. The theories about what women want, what turns women on, what women are looking for, right? How people should date, how people should behave in relationships is so full of anecdotal stories and references to science that's poorly understood by the person referencing it, that it should be jaw-dropping. But most of us, most guys, and I'm not really having a go at you guys because it's so organic, so human to fall subject to this, don't realize it's going on. I'll give you a really great example. You can easily go right now and have a look at what turns women on scientifically. So studies they've done about what features in a man women like. And you sure enough will find many studies, not all, but quite a few, that will show that one of the biggest things that women look for in a guy is attractiveness. So you look at that study, some men do, they look at that study and they go, clearly looks is the only thing women care about, which is already not what the data showed, but that's what they pull away from it. Looks is the only thing that really matters because it's the biggest factor there. They don't look at what the researchers actually have to say about the matter in the paper. They don't look at what the peer review process says. And they don't look at any other evidence that talks about this topic. Because if they did, they'd see a lot more to the story. They would see that actually women's attractiveness, women's desire to find attractive men is not a linear scale. What actually most studies that I've found show is that women just want they want to feel like their guy is attractive to them. It's not a sliding scale where they're constantly seeking a hotter and hotter and hotter man, as is more true for men. Women just need a man to be who they consider attractive, and that's it. Doesn't need to be super hot, doesn't need to be anything. They just need to find him sexually attractive. But then there's more research than that. There's research that shows just how big an impact how a man grooms and dresses and smells, how much of an impact that has on the objective attractiveness a woman feels that he has. Right? And then there's more research. There's more research that shows that women are actually sexually plastic, meaning that they can change what they consider to be attractive over relatively short periods of time, unlike men. And there are lots of other research studies out there that show that there is a lot you do have control over, right? Even if you're not ideally, a great-looking guy, there are so many factors that you can control that have an impact on how women are going to see you. But because the story, the narrative that it's not your fault is so compelling. And this is what's really dangerous. This is why I believe there's true danger in good stories and poor science. If you're struggling, and a lot of men are struggling, a lot of men feel alone, lonely, disregarded, not cared about, not listened to. It's the experience of a lot of guys. I'm sure some of you watching as well. And when you're in that space, if you see something that feels true enough, that looks like it's scientific enough, and what it says to you is, it's not your fault at all. It's the world. You are not to blame. Don't worry about it. Not your fault, dude. That is temporary relieving. It is tasty. It is tempting. It's something that you are compelled at a very gut level to trust and believe because it takes the pressure off your back. But here's why it's dangerous, because it feels temporarily good. It feels good in the beginning, but what it does is it traps you in a prison. Because inside of that prison is saying there is nothing you can do. You're always going to be alone. You've got no control over this, Buster. You're always going to be in this situation. But it's not your fault. But you're always going to be like this. But it's not your fault. But you're always going to be like this. And it prevents men from engaging or experiencing very real change that will bring them changes in the results that they can get in the world. And there's very good reason why the world of dating is so full of rumor and bad science. And it's because of dirty data. Now, that's not at all sexual as it's meant to sound. I'll give an example. I had a client a long time ago, and he was getting really cocky, and I thought, I'm going to give him a dare, something that's going to push his boundary, push his edge, And I said to him, you know what? See that girl over there? See that group of girls? I want you to go up to them, and I want you to say, hey girls, do you like anal sex? I just wanted to push him and see if he dared to do it. He went up to them and he said it to them. Not only did he say it to them, he went home with one of them. The next week I saw him, he said, man, that is the best line ever. He said, I'm using it from now on. I'm like, He said, no, forget about it. It's great. I love it. And sure enough, he would use that line. He'd be going up to girls all night. Hey girls, do you like anal sex? And not only would he be saying it, not only would the girls be laughing and kind of enjoying it, he'd be getting serious success with it, taking girls home. Way more success than he had any right to have. And the fact is that it'd be very easy to look at that and say, it's a magical line. That's the pickup line. That's what every woman wants to hear, right? Because every woman secretly wants anal sex. It's a form of penis envy, don't you know? And I'm sure you could create a great story about it. But the truth of the matter is that it's likely not the words. I'm willing to bet a lot that it's not the words. I'm willing to bet that what it was doing was he was demonstrating his desire to have fun. He was demonstrating confidence. He was demonstrating a lack of regard for the notion of being rejected. He was polarizing women. He was doing all these things inadvertently that made that line work for him, right? Because I don't think I could use that. I couldn't. I've tried it before just on lark and it doesn't work so well for me. It just matched his personality perfectly. But how do you prove that scientifically, right? It's very, very hard to do. And so you can imagine any dating coach or pickup artist can go out there and go, well, this works for me and this is this magic little process that I use. It's called the Do You Like Anal Sex method and you should use it now, just $2.99. And so what do the experts actually say? What do women want? Well, it probably shouldn't come as a surprise that the ultimate answer is, we're not sure. Because we are not sure. For all the research that we've done, it's really not clear. And it's not clear primarily because, and this is what we really think as a whole from a science vantage point, a psychology standpoint, human beings have a variety, in fact, a spectrum of different sexual preferences. That is that some women are going to be genetically wired to be more promiscuous and others are going to be genetically wired to be more monogamous. So same for guys. Some men are going to be more promiscuous. Some men are going to be wired to be more monogamous. Some men are going to be wired to be highly adventure-seeking. Some are going to be wired to be highly conservative. Same for women. And what you end up finding is that there's likely a spectrum and different parts of the spectrum are attractive to other parts of the spectrum, right? Like a key and a lock. And that in reality, if you want to be great with women, it's better off to find a niche or a spectrum that you are most likely to appeal to and talk to those women because they're the women who are most likely to like you. That's what the science says. And even then, they're not 100% sure though, right? That's just where we stand right now. And if these really smart, intelligent researchers don't 100% know, don't believe that any story I or any other dating coach tells you is 100% true. All we can do is extrapolate from data the best that we can. So be careful of the story and be especially careful of any story that says it's not your fault and there's nothing you can do, so don't worry about it. I hope that this video ruffles some feathers, but not too many feathers. I'd love to discuss this more in the comments below. As always, I love these kinds of videos that push boundaries, that make men feel a little bit uncomfortable. Unfortunately, that's just how we grow. As always, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and check out some other videos because I reckon if you like this one, you might just like those as well.